Hi. I'm so pleased to be here at a gathering explicitly open to challenging the status quo in the psychedelic landscape, as many of us come to question how the ushering in of a rebooted renaissance, which I took as a time of passionate interdisciplinary inquiry and collaboration, became a race to position novel intellectual property in the marketplace into mainstream health as the next iteration of the silver bullet, a saved by the bell moment for psychiatry as consumer confidence dwindles in its neurocentric, hyper-individualized pharmacocosmology, as we attempt to loosen its grip on the supply and delivery of mind-altering drug solutions to human problems. Psychedelic medicine co-opted into contexts, in therapeutic contexts, in service of trauma, encourages us to root it out of our scorekeeping bodies with claims that it can be transformed by heroic acts of surrender, cloaked in the mystical, which is not to be confused with the mysterious or ambiguous. If you can face your fears and strangle the life out of your ego, reset your default mode network before surrendering, not resisting your central healing intelligence, which you may or may not know you had, you may well emerge changed, transformed, plastic, and open to suggestions like mushrooms will make you a nicer person and save the world. Healed at long last. If you are confused about the mashup here of clinical, therapeutic, transpersonal, and neo-spiritual discourses, you are not alone. There is probably a $5,000 to $10,000 training of 3, 5, or 300 days duration with a manual that you can follow that will sort that out for you and equip you to navigate this with each and every client, be they psychedelically naive or full-blown psychonauts. Maps, we have a few Maps fans in the house. I'd love to do like half an hour of Maps bashing, but we'll do that some other time. It released its first protocol in 2015 for therapists in their clinical trials and was touted widely and without question as a best practice model for guiding people through non-ordinary states of consciousness. That model splits the difference on the therapy part of substance-assisted therapy with instructions encouraging a hands-on approach in some regards, as in hand-holding, and a hands-off or non-directive approach for the bulk of the rest of the session, which I find relationally ambiguous. The dominance of this protocol and the rush to be certified in it brushed past first and second wave research, along with other cultural and religious-based approaches and present-day community knowledge informed by the ethics of harm reduction and cognitive liberty. MDMA isn't legal, but you can be trained in how to work with it. And an afternoon of guided hyperventilating or breath work is near enough to the real thing for now. Personally, I prefer spinning around really fast until I fall over or smoking a joint, which has been legal in Canada since 2017. I have rejected the manualizing of substance-assisted therapy and that particular training pathway, not because it is to me what painting by numbers is to art, but because of a lack of alignment with its founding principles. The protocol has been updated a number of times, great, but its questionable foundations remain. It is built on the transpersonal work of Stan Grof, and this paradigm prizes acts of individual heroism with echoes of doctrines of discovery as our psychonautical forefathers render the cartography of consciousness for us. Grof, a transpersonal psychotherapist, was fixated on birth trauma and was among many who pathologized queerness. High doses of LSD were readily incorporated into conversion therapies, and Grof stipulated cis male and female therapist dyads to create conditions for the kind of mummy and daddy-based transference that was thought to produce queerness in men in particular. Mum and dad hover over you, tuck you into bed, blindfold you, hold your hand, and encourage you to step bravely into the abyss of your psyche with some Wagner or perhaps some Louis Armstrong, reminding you how wonderful the world is as your soundtrack. If you are into the Johns Hopkins greatest hits list, which endures and overshadows the significant contribution of music therapist Helen Bonney's original work of guided imagery to music, but that is also another story. I was previously fond of very thorough social location statements inspired by an ethic of transparency, where I believe that my clients and colleagues have a right to know who they're dealing with so that they can decide what they are and aren't comfortable to share with me. I'll spare you the full version of that and go into what I feel is most useful to declare to you today. As investors pair up with his researchers and clinicians like teens at a school dance, you'll find that I have no conflicts of interest to report. I'm here on my own dime. I'm a professional fringe dweller, keen to speak freely and with very little to lose by doing so. I consult part-time at a ketamine clinic where I specialize in relational psycholytic work, but the bulk of my practice-based research has taken place independently with legal, unscheduled, or decriminalized compounds such as cannabis and the entactogen or heart medicine, it is also referred to by lay people, 3-MMC, methylmethcathinone. My work is situated in community with the support of the network of knowledgeable peers. My practice has too many eyes on it to be called a private practice, so I refer to it as independent, a bit like indie films are to blockbuster movies. We work with limited resources and a high degree of agility, responsiveness, and creativity. I am also keen to challenge the binary of above and underground work. I am situated somewhere in the middle, on the ground with my feet firmly planted in community. I believe your job was also to make some pictures happen. That would be marvelous. Thank you. I'm a narrative therapist, as developed by David Epstein and Michael White in the 80s, and an expressive arts therapist with a lifelong relationship to arts practice and an adult lifetime of experience with substances in naturalistic and structured contexts that span the sacred and the profane. I believe I can be most useful to you today identifying as a substance user, so you know that this is also what we look like, and to strongly suggest to you that professionalism is not an identity or a costume, but a practice. I resist notions of psychedelic exceptionalism that suggest a certain hierarchy of compounds and particular use cases, especially now that the dirty street drugs of my youth are being rehabilitated, redeemed, and rebranded as medicines. I witness people make do with what they have to change state, inspire, regulate, connect, disconnect, and self-medicate, and I support their rights to do so. My approach is as pragmatic as it is political, a collaborative undertaking to find the right tool for the right job for where someone is at. And this is furthered by my growing understanding of the skills and competencies and variety of meaning-making frameworks that support people working with non-ordinary states. My practice could be considered a collective inquiry into what these compounds make therapeutically possible, into what art makes possible in the places where words fail. Poetic language is the perfect form to capture what you sound like when you speak from your heart. A kinetic drawing becomes evidence and an embodied memory of what it felt like to be relieved of self-consciousness for just long enough to suspend the usual conclusions that you come to about yourself and what you've been led to believe is wrong with you. 7 years of work isn't possible to condense into this presentation into what lies in the space, the chasm between medical and near-spiritual paradigms. I encourage you to look at what lies close at hand, exoticizing the domestic, considering the artist's ways of refreshing our ways of seeing, cherishing the ordinary, and valuing what is experienced near and contemporary over the fetishizing of ancient cultures and cherry-picking of indigenous cosmologies. Extracting them from the complex, non-hierarchical webs of relationships that they came from. I would argue we might take a few more steps towards addressing white supremacy before we tackle monotheism and human supremacy through right relationship with our seen and unseen kin. Again, my practices are born out of pragmatism. I grew up a working class kid. I work with mid to low income clients that can't afford to travel to the jungle or eat, pray, love their way through India. Most of them barely get enough time off work to make it out of the city. We make do with what we have, and we've found we have quite a lot. I consider art in all its guises as part of an unbroken liberatory lineage, as a collection of spiritual technologies well-versed in transcendence and pathways to ecstasy. I think people recognize this most readily in their relationship to music and the ways that they are moved by it. The next chapter of my work will be looking into this further, into the ubiquitous use of music across current protocols, and challenging another set of increasingly fixed ideas about what that is supposed to sound like. Sounds a lot like East Forest these days. In challenging the dominance of transformational discourses in psychedelics, I consider the ways psychedelic feminism decenters the trope of the hero's journey. I'm inviting you to consider other approaches that you might find, like tuning in to what's all around you rather than journeying far from home on a quest of your own design. Instead, we make space for slow unravelings, unweaving and reweaving the fabric of your existence, chipping away at something, poking holes in fixed ideas, or engaged in powerful and intentional, deliberate acts of remembering and forgetting. I'm not selling transformations, and I'm not big on catharsis. I would prefer to invite you to lower the stakes and minimize the fear of failure, starting with a humble reassessment of your situation in your own words, and perhaps seeing yourself through a different lens. So there's some images coming up here around what these ideas actually look like in practice. So drawing on my background in theatre, I've arrived at the inclusion of a low-dose dress rehearsal before the main event or performance. It's an integral part of how I structure safety and tailor the work to suit each person's preferred pace and existing practices. All the world is a stage, you may have heard, but every stage is also a tiny universe we populate with our longings. As we work to determine what the beginning, middle, and end might contain, I invite them to meet the molecule halfway. The drug does not do the work on its own, and I will never relieve you entirely of your agency in the process. That is not a requirement. Something doesn't feel right about asking for heroism from marginalized people who are engaging with so many unknowns at once. Maybe coming to rest and finding respite from struggle is an okay place to start. Maybe you could master relaxing before tackling surrender. What if I promised you could keep that coat of many colors, also referred to as your ego, but would be welcome to hang it up in the corner for a few hours? You may be different after the session, but the world is probably just as you left it. Relational collaborative psycholytic work preserves client autonomy and builds confidence and insight. The addition of expressive arts methodologies supports opportunities to externalize material into something symbolic, just beyond the reach of language, beyond jargon and therapy speak. Letting go of language has also helped answer the question of what is the compound doing? People ask, how will I know it's working? And I'm afraid my word isn't good enough here. I need to show you, not tell you. So I start with a short doodling exercise, that's what you're seeing now, before the compound is administered and just after. So we start with a museum dose of just over the threshold of perception, ideally. The invitation is very structured with a series of replicable steps that lead you to contact an impulse and transfer it onto a page. Like everything, this invitation is as complex or straightforward as you want to make it. We repeat the steps around 90 minutes after ingestion. Sometimes we attempt an interpretation, and sometimes we just let the images do the talking. Whatever it is that we've measured, I ask the client to imagine what that shift multiplied by 2 or 3 times might be good for, and how we might factor this into how we design our next meeting, the main event. This exercise also allows me to compare differences in the way people metabolize the substances and speak to the effects, which then informs decisions that we both come to about future dosages. I'm also paying attention to things like the time it takes to contact the impulse, the size, shape, flow, color, and quality of attack of the strokes on the page. When consulting on our best course, people often ask, how much will I need and how long before I feel better? I let them know we'll have to arrive at an answer together, as I don't know, and perhaps they don't know yet either, the condition of the heart in question and what it might need to be revived, repaired, or soothed. Is it broken, hardened, caged, or weary? Does it need a shot in the arm or a voice? I'm aware at this point the drug is and does pretty much what I say it does. 3-MMC is not as widely known or quite as infamous in Canada as MDMA, and it's not a responsibility I take lightly, but I do hold as playfully as I can. Any additional placebo effect is welcome as a psychosomatic ally, and will take some ease any way it comes. I employ a $40 stethoscope to help me navigate this tricky landscape of influence and suggestibility. I love appropriating medical symbols. If you're going to participate in your own wellness, why don't you go all the way? Hold the clipboard, use the tools, your intimate knowledge of the patient, have a stab at a diagnosis, prognosis, and prescription while you're at it. This is an invitation into different depths of listening and a fundamental form of biofeedback and interoception. You can tune into the rhythm of your heart's unwavering support, hear it murmur, start a conversation, or attempt to inhabit that space and speak from it. There's a maxim in narrative therapy: the person isn't the problem is the problem. So we map the problem and use that as a guide or inspiration for possible solutions, bringing forth into hemispheric insight that these compounds elicit. My work is defined by secular, contemporary, post-structuralist, and relational ideas and practices of approximation over appropriation, where appropriate. I employ neuroaesthetic experiencing and bihemispheric engagement to resource wonder and pleasure as foundations for a life well lived, or at the very least, a life you can live with. Perhaps it is better defined by what it strives not to be than what it is. I take a negative space approach that shifts the emphasis from inclusion to concerted efforts to exclude or at least decenter constructs such as neoliberalism, sexism, heteronormativity, neurotypicality, ableism, white, and human supremacy. If I pull these threads out of the therapeutic relationship, what remains? A contentious space, perhaps, where I interrogate my loyalty to any pedagogy, ideology, cosmology, guru, or practice that doesn't serve the person in front of me. And this doesn't always foster a lot of solidarity among my peers. You might be surprised to know who all seem to be very into IFS at the moment. 7 years down the road, a realm of maybes, let's sees, and possibilities has fostered co-research partnerships that refuse to disqualify the considerable insights people have into their shared struggles and the workings of their own hearts and minds. I present this series of provocations not as an I have the answer, but in the spirit of welcoming diverse approaches to the unknown, because we don't really know, which means your guess is as good as anybody's. I am proud to share this work with you, in large part due to the trust, confidence, and generosity of those who've joined me in over 100 sessions of spirited inquiry. I would like to thank you for the precious gift of your attention, and by closing, share with you an ingenious theatrical advice designed to break spells, lift energy, and our spirits in appreciation of our time together. Goes a little something like this.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for this very refreshing talk.
Thank you.
I feel energized.
Yay!
Possibilities. Comments, questions, please.
I got one for you. Who knows about 3-MMC in this room? Okay, few people. So I've seen lots of slides comparing studies and who's working with what. 3-MMC is all over the underground in Canada. People have been working with it for a lot of years. It's a very popular naturalistic drug across Europe. Yeah, so just a smattering of folks here. Interesting. My peers refer to it unkindly as MDMA light. That's not fair. It's its whole own thing. But anyway, questions?
Well, my question actually is, how do you see 3-MMC comparing to MDMA, or whether you worked with MDMA as well, and how they compare in your view?
Raver. My association with MDMA, like, oh, gee, Blue Monday, Suicide Tuesday, not my favorite, like, the downside of it. I prefer 3-MMC because it doesn't chew up any endogenous supply. It's a dopaminergic forward as opposed to serotonergic forward compound. Same receptors, cleaner, faster, still very heart opening without that kind of like overwhelming wave of euphoria. I find that you can still kind of like steer the experience. It's perfect basically as a relational drug. People really connect with sharing their stories very readily, but in a way that doesn't feel too like, oh, velvet, I want to touch you. Yeah. There's a lot of utility.
Good. Questions, comments?
Could you be so kind to say something about these brilliant images you showed, and especially why sometimes they seemed so, some seemed before after, I can understand that, but then there are others that seem sort of very similar without that comment. So
problem maps. So, I engage people in conversation about what their sense of, so in the preparatory meetings, when I ask people what's going on for them, I get a list of pathologizing language. I have anxiety, I have depression, so under the influence, I ask the question again, and we are often standing at a blackboard, and we just start talking about what's going on and see if we can create a kind of schematic or find other language for what's going on for them. So these are people reinterpreting their symptomology, for want of a better word, into visual problem maps that we then find solutions for. So I'm trying to find like abstracted ways of working, something that sits in this symbolic space that encourages people to use their creativity to reinterpret themselves and inspire different ways of approaching the problems.
Thank you, Carmen, for a mesmerizing presentation. I'm wondering, like, when we think about kind of the world of protocols, right? And at the moment, there's so much work towards kind of legitimizing, and somehow there is criticism about the medical model, but there is also a lot of mimicking the medical model. And as you said, like, training is very based on certification and programs. What do you think is, like, how to bring into this kind of like system more of the client, first of all, collaboration with the client that you do very strongly? Like, I feel like it's sometimes missing a little bit as we're building this kind of like very professionalized culture. Like, where is all of this kind of collaboration with the client, and how do we strengthen this?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know where the collaboration is, but it's very necessary. And I think, what you're speaking to there in terms of like what training looks like, I don't think we have a really clear sense yet of, what the range of skills that the therapist might practice or bring to the process might be, but also, what the skills and competencies the client might need to develop. Like, that's where I think we really have a role, is helping them develop ways of navigating non-ordinary states. If we're going to ask people to spend hours roaming around in the dark in their interior landscapes, it might be useful if they have some skills on how to get themselves out of trouble there. And those are things that we can practice, that are really useful to practice in lower dose work as a form of preparation. The other form of preparation that I would like to see more, thank you so much for your presentation and talking about structural dissociation and the stuff that comes up. Ontological shock, when someone doesn't have a meaning-making framework in place of how to make sense of all this random stuff that's coming up. Like, there's been a lot of focus on meeting people for integration afterwards, but I would like to see in the preparatory work this real kind of taking the time to work out what that person's, how they're going to make sense of this material, how they make sense of themselves in the world, because there is a very good chance that that foundation is going to be shaken in some way by these compounds. And I'll be a bit facetious here, oh, surprise, surprise, it's a much easier mess to clean up if you've had those conversations before the compound when you go into integrating it afterwards.
Over here.
Thank you for the talk. Can you speak on the part of your or your part of how you prepare yourself for such like what sounds like a very intuitive, attuning, playful place of where you be with the person and the relational work. So how you prepare yourself or tune yourself so that you are able to do that again and again?
I work my ass off to really get a sense of the client's interior world and their preferences before we get anywhere near the compounds. I am listening all the time for metaphors in particular, or symbols that I might be able to, weave into the work. I spend a lot of time making individualized playlists. They are basically like a mixtape full of love that I have made for you based on things that I've come to learn about you and what I feel like might be a useful structure or support. So even just looking at the way that I work with music as an individualized thing, we talked a little bit about how we might work with, and again, thank you for your lovely presentation around the idea of windows of tolerance. We can use music that is deliberately stressful and evocative to work with those levels of tolerance that might mimic anxiety if that's what's going on for the person, or maybe they are looking for something that is, a place to rest or soothing or relaxing, or something that will, quietly bring about or take them back to their childhood. I work with scent also, which is marvelous transporting for that. So I'm just taking in a sponge, as much information all the time. And we're still recording. We are, am I going to say this or not say this? Okay, so this is a common practice in the underground, is to invite the client whether they would like to be accompanied or unaccompanied in the process, is in terms of taking a small amount of the same compound to provide a certain amount of attunement. So I give them that option. Yeah, and most people do prefer to be accompanied. They want you to be on the same page and attuned in the same way with them. So generally in the dress rehearsal, that doesn't happen, and we really need to, get to this place of where we know that we are both comfortable enough to spend 6 hours together in a room.
So does low dose of 3-MMC, does it take you there enough? Because with MDMA you might get a very unpleasant experience with a very low dose. Mm-hmm. So how does it work with 3-MMC?
So the dosing is fairly similar to MDMA. So a recreational dose of MDMA is normally somewhere around 100 milligrams. My starting dose when we do our dress rehearsal, the client is working with 50 milligrams of 3-MMC, which would sit in that kind of museum dose range, so just over the threshold of perception. And if they want me to accompany them when we do our main performance thing, I'm normally sitting at about half that, at 25, so somewhere around a microdose. And I think you'll find that, this is the case for a lot of experienced substance users over time. You actually need less and less of the substance as you go. You just need the tiniest little bit of it to kind of, bring back your sense of it. Yeah. So it's more symbolic than anything, actually. Yeah. And you need to be very well rested.
Thank you all for your questions, and thank you once again, Carmen.
Thank you.